We don't have to talk long to realize that things aren't the way they should be. When it comes to our relationship with other people, it's hard enough just the fact that they're not you. And then you throw in differences that might be fundamental, that might be external, that might be cultural, and it becomes all the more difficult. And this is something that's not a new issue. For many of us, and for myself included, thinking about it, even just preparing for this was, to be honest. And that's a huge part of the task before us, is to not simply work for change and to fight and pursue that, but it's actually to replace our own ignorance to begin with. And I've invited 3 of my friends up here to help us as we start that journey tonight. Honestly, to share from their perspective, from their opinion, some of the things. I guess I need my questions if we're going to talk about this. And just really have a time of being able to really start to relate to what it is that we're talking about. So before we get started, I know you guys, they might not all know you. Really quick, introduce yourself, your name, where you're originally from, and as well as what you do here in the city.
Good evening. My name is Samuel Phillips, originally from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Go Vikings. All day. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. I've been here for about 8 years. Been serving at Vintage for about 3 years, and I'm currently a musician and a teacher here in the city.
Did you say magician or musician?
Musician.
Did anybody else think that, or was that just me? I guess it was just me. No, I knew it was. I just wanted to clarify. Anyway, my name is Josh Cook. I am a magician, so that's really cool. Anyway, I am from Atlanta, Georgia, but don't worry, I'm not a Falcons fan. I'm not, don't worry. I am currently the V-Kids leader at Vintage Church, and I am here in the city also getting my seminary degree, and I'll be done in May, and I think that's it.
Good evening. My name is Ellie Aguilar. I'm originally from Honduras. I've been living here in New Orleans for 19 years now. And I've been part of Vintage for the past 3 years, and I work as a physical therapist assistant at Ochsner.
And Ellie, you can just hold on the mic. We'll start with you because you got it, and I knew you wanted to. You told me beforehand, you said, please make sure I get every question. And Josh, thank you for being our token white guy on the discussion panel about race. I think before we get started, before we can move forward with anything, we kind of have to figure out where we are. And a lot of that begins with actually defining our terms. And so when we even say the word race, that can mean a lot. A lot of people would argue that that's not even an appropriate word for the conversation that we're having. But Ellie, when you think of race, and really any of you guys that want to answer as well, you can, how would you define race? How would you define race? How would you define racism, from your opinion?
Well, I'm just going to answer from my perspective. I have to be honest with you. When I think about race, the first thing that comes to mind is color. And then cultural and just costumes. And I think that is also, that's something that I think I've been conditioned to think about that way, you know. I think of racism as something that is a negative practice in our lives, in our culture. It's something that is just having negative feelings to certain people's groups.
I actually was really struggling with this question. It's difficult to define race, I think. You know, it can't be boiled down, I don't think, to necessarily the color of a person's skin or something like that. And even as I was thinking about it and wondering, you know, like, is there any way that, like, is race just supposed to be here? Is it something that we're supposed to always live with and exist with and celebrate? And I started thinking to myself, it immediately hit me that I'm white. Sometimes I remember that. And I was thinking about it, and I was like, you know what? Like, I've spent so much time trying to forget that or not think about it or whatever, but I think that in a lot of ways, races or different races are things that people can celebrate, but I started thinking about how I didn't know what that looked like for me, you know what I'm saying? So, because my immediate response was like, no, race should be done with. We should get rid of that. But then there's a lot of cultures and a lot of ethnicities that have sort of a rich racial background and history that they don't need to forget, you know? And so it really made me, just this question made me process, like, what of my racial history do I need to be remembering and celebrating? So I think racism is sort of the opposite of that when you do that to another person, when you reject them based on some assumption that you have because of their, because of the history that you assume that they have. And then as I was thinking about that, I started to say it's a prejudicial action when you act differently to a person, but I started thinking about the Sermon on the Mount, and when Jesus goes through all of these different commands that the people of Israel had for all these years, and he said, no, it's not if you murder someone, it's if you hate someone in your mind. And no, it's not if you commit adultery, it's if you have lustful thoughts. So then I took it to a whole new level, and I think that racism is not just actions, but it's thoughts as well.
I agree.
And then just speak to that, Samuel, because and build off of that. I don't know, and this is the fun part of a discussion panel when you don't know what they're going to say beforehand. And I haven't disagreed with anything you said yet, so you're good. But even just building off of that with your response, the terms in general, do you think we should use different terminology? Scientifically speaking, anthropologically, we are one race.
As a black man in America, I think that's a difficult question to ask versus someone such as yourself who is Honduran, because I can look at my girlfriend, I can say, okay, she's Latina with a background of Puerto Rican or certain Middle Eastern countries, or someone such as yourself, I believe you're from Fiji, right? Or where are you from? Cambodia, right? So for some reason I thought it was Fiji. Forgive me. See what I did there? But right, same thing, right? Same thing. They all look the same, don't they? Nah, but it's I always tell people I'm over 400 years removed from my specific bloodline, so I can't ever exactly say what I am. Where am I from? I mean, you can say that I'm from Africa in some area, right? But do I feel as if that the word needs to be done away with? Are you asking me if race needs to be done away with?
Yeah, there's a more helpful thing.
No, definitely not. Because I think, as Josh was saying, it's something that needs to be celebrated. I think it's more important for us to be able to understand and appreciate the differences, but I think the difference becomes in when our identity, like we idolize our identity, or we idolize, like, I am a black man, and that is where my identity is. I think that's when the differentiation comes in, or white power, or something of that sort. When you begin to idolize that, I feel like that's when it begins to become a problem.
So, all right, Josh, we're going to start with you on the next question, and I know you're excited about that, because it won't be the focus of the night, but we have to hit on it, and that's the idea. Whenever we talk about race, ethnicity, in our country and where we're at now, the discussion also goes to white privilege. And so in your own words, how would you define white privilege? Because, man, 8 months ago, I don't think I'd ever heard of it before, to be honest. It wasn't part of my vernacular and how I communicated even the same ideas. So how would you define white privilege, and do you think it's something that's prevalent in society as a white person?
Well, I would first of all like to say I think that's very racist of you to ask me first.
It seemed to fit.
Anyway, so I spent a lot of time thinking about this question too, and I agree with you. White privilege was not a part of my vocabulary growing up or anything like that. I didn't feel privileged. I mean, I grew up sort of lower middle class, working class family outside of Atlanta, I had a great life, don't get me wrong, but I never thought of myself as just being living the high life because I was white or something. So that's obviously not what white privilege means to me, but I think what it means, as I've come to understand it at least, is the disadvantages or the advantages that being white can bring you in this country. And I think that at the heart of it, it's the fact that you are not getting prejudiced against. I really don't think that there's any sort of there are crazy groups out there, but I don't think people are sort of intentionally fostering white privilege as much as I, because of who I am not going to get treated poorly because of my race by people who are racist. I guess that's like white privilege in a sort of synopsis, at least as I understand it. And so it's kind of a strange thing. I think that it's weird because, like I said, I had never thought of it. When I was growing up, the discussion was more so about like differences that, well, now I'm just sort of rambling, I think. But no, I don't know where I was going with that. You guys, I've been so scared I was going to say something racist the whole time I was up here. Probably because of white privilege. I've been freaking myself out, and it's my cultural heritage. That's something that I have to deal with. So,
you guys want to build off of that?
Yeah, please jump in.
You asked the question, does white privilege exist? Absolutely, 100%. And I look at it as more so as being like a social pass. You know, as a black man, once again, I can be standing next to him, and there may be certain, especially because of the way I'm dressed, there may be certain insinuations on my character, my vernacular. It's not going to be as easy for me to be able to just traverse through society because of the color of my skin. But he may walk in, I may make more money than he does, I may have a better job, but it's going to be the automatic assumption because he's got the slick over to the right, he's got the glasses on, and they may be like, oh, you must be like a pre-med student, when I'm like, actually, I have my own practice, you know? It's more sort of about perception, you know, the perception of white, because as I was thinking about this question, I realized that our country is founded upon, like, fundamentally, you know, from like a constitutional perspective, it's founded upon Anglo, or whatever the correct term is to, you know, talk about white people. White people are considered to be more human than black. If you look at when the Constitution was written, and that mentality is kind of passed down through lineage over time. And so just off of that, you know, principle alone, you know, you can see that especially we're living in the South, and I'm not saying anyone that's from the South may be wrong for their mentalities, but the reality is that sometimes white people may look at us, or we may look at white people out of angst, or they may look at us out of certain presumption that somebody in their family may have given to them. And then you made a point where you said something along the lines of, we're not going to be, racism you may not necessarily have racism on the reverse effect, but I had to disagree with that, because I felt, because of the lineage of our country, and historically speaking, there may be a lot of black people around you that are racist to you, but you just may not know it, because there is some kind of angst within inside of them, and they're like, yo, man, son, like, it's so much easier for, like, dude, I talk to my girlfriend all the time, like, yo, sometimes I wake up in the morning, I'm like, yo, I wish I was white. Why? Not literally white, I enjoy my blackness, but sometimes I'm like, yo, it would be so much easier for me to get things done if I didn't look how I looked. I'm not upset at God for making me how I am, but that's just the reality that I have to deal with, you know. And some people may take that the wrong way, and they may turn that angst and that anger and push it back on you, versus just being like, this is the reality that God gave me, and this is an opportunity, as you said, to kind of surpass that by living out the gospel in every way possible, right?
So building off that, you're sharing from your experience there, and I'd like to hear from all three of you on this next question. And you get to start first. Congrats, Ellie. But let's talk about the present. Let's talk about your present. And just in terms of over the course of your life, and just who you are, how have you personally experienced this issue? Whether that's on either side of racism, maybe having personally experienced racism, personally experienced what Samuel was talking about in terms of the negative aspects of white privilege. But I don't know if you have any stories or anything. I mean, I've given you a few days to think about it, so I'm sure you have wonderful things. Expectations, go.
I actually didn't find anything in my life that like any stories in a sense of having experienced racism against me. Like, I don't remember ever, but it's not to say that it hasn't happened. Like, I just haven't been aware of it. I think actually what came to mind was the times that I've been racist against somebody, that I've been prejudiced against somebody. Like just what you were saying, the way that somebody is dressed, the way that somebody looks, the way that they fix their hair, the way that they speak. So I actually, like this, it kind of brought, like, it's like a mirror that I'm just looking at myself. So I'm actually find myself on the other side. Not just against African Americans or Anglo, but even in my own race, as a Hispanic person, when I think of a certain person of Hispanic background, I think, okay, this person might, this is what their customs might be, or what they think or do, So that's it. I'm not speaking in general terms, but I find myself on that side.
I was thinking about this, and I have racism in my family, definitely, for sure. And I think I've had to sort of rewrite some of the narrative I was maybe taught growing up and stuff, and it's tough. It's like Sam was saying, that like from the beginning, like when America was founded, slavery still existed, and racism was open and legal and encouraged in that way. And so it's taken generations and generations to get to where we are, and we're definitely not at the end. And I'm not sure that there is this zenith where everyone is not racist anymore. So yeah, I've experienced it like that on my own, in my own life. I remember one time when I was growing up, my little brother was in kindergarten, and in kindergarten you have these little like girlfriends or whatever, and so we thought it was really funny because he came home one night and one of his little kindergarten girlfriends was black, and like everybody was, yeah, it was cool. It was cool. So it was this strange moment for me. I was like 7 years older than him and everything, and the family was all reacting in their different ways and everything like that, and I really had to process, because I was like, no, it's like not wrong, right? And then other family members were not a fan of it, especially sort of some of the older generations and stuff like that. It just got really awkward. I think that was the first time I was really confronted with me having to make a decision about racism. There's probably other things in my life before then and even continually after that I probably subconsciously do. I mean, I think that's sort of the reality that Ellie was sharing, that, very few people set out to be a racist, and I think that, but I think if we all were really honest with ourselves, we'd recognize that we all have racism within us, that are just presuppositions that we take for granted every single day, assumptions that we make about other people. So yeah, that was mine. I had another story, if I may. I wasn't. This wasn't when someone acted racistly against me, but it was a feeling that I had one time. I went camping by myself up into Arkansas. That's a white person thing, I guess, or whatever. I don't. I'm sorry. Do you camp?
Fish too, and I go.
I don't fish. Anyway, I'm sorry. I knew I was going to say something racist. So. Anyway, I went camping, and I'll set the scene. I'm wearing my glasses. I got my swoosh hair. I've got my... It was a few years ago when these like cut-off jean shorts were really cool, so I was wearing those. They were kind of rolled up. Yeah, like my white legs are hanging out and everything. Yeah, they're high. And and I have a V-neck, and I stop in this Subway outside of Shreveport, and like everybody's wearing overalls and John Deere hats and everything like that. And I had this really profound experience where I was like, they are judging me because of how I've been dressed. Like, I've never really experienced that before, and I'm sure, and like, it's probably offensive for me to even equate that to anything you guys might have experienced, but the feeling in the room was palpable, and it definitely sort of flipped a switch in my mind that, like, racism doesn't have to be me telling you don't get this job because you're a certain race. It doesn't have to be, way back in the day saying that other people can't vote. Like no one said anything, no one did anything, but I could just feel it, and I could see it in their eyes that I was, being judged, and it's powerful and painful. So,
as she was speaking, I had this, like, something came to me, and I kind of realized about the effect that media in any light, whether it be a bright light or a dark light, the kind of effect that it has on our social perception of race. And I was like, if any Asians in the room, it was the first example that came to mind, so please don't be offended. But I thought about even the interactions with, that's my phone. I thought about the interactions that I've had with Chris, my roommate, when I was living with him, and this is the kind of conversations that we've had and the jokes that we make, like, openly, like, behind closed doors, as if it's like it's okay. Like, we may talk in like a different kind of accent or something like that. But it's like, why do we think it's okay to mock people? And it's like, would we do that openly if they were standing right in front of us? Probably not. But it's like, oh, we can joke about it because it's funny, right? Or like, man, this is crazy Asian lady that was driving. Or like, da-da-da. It's like, well, the insinuation that she's a bad driver, that she's Asian. It's like that image or that perception was impressed upon us against our will. And we kind of adopted that and tried to make it humorous as if it's okay. That was my thought. Tangent. But have I been in racist situations in life? Yeah, have, of course. Stories, one of the main ones that always sticks out to me, when I was about 12 years old, I moved to Minneapolis, Minnesota from Massachusetts, Boston, Massachusetts, and my father had a pretty lucrative job. We lived in, I'd probably say we're upper middle class, pretty large size house, and I was living in Plymouth, Minnesota, where there were no black people but my family, and you make friends with, kids in your class, and, it had about a year or so had passed, of me riding bikes to my friend Kevin's house, and and so finally, Ma, can Kevin come over and sleep over at the house? Sure, but before he does that, I need to meet his mom first. Great. Of course, being naive 12-year-olds, you're like, oh, sweet, awesome. So mom shows up at the crib, all right? Ding dong. Open the door, and she goes. And my mom goes, excuse me? She goes, oh, I just wasn't expecting this. And she goes, expecting what? She goes, oh, I'm sorry, never mind. And from that moment in time, like a veil was kind of removed from my eyes. I kind of realized my parents had always done a really good job at, instilling, the fact that I am an African-American male, and there's going to be certain things that come up, and I have to be proud of that, and I have to kind of just traverse or persevere, I guess, through that, through those issues. But different times people come up, a dude, father, not a dude, flat out asked my dad, how did you buy this house? And he was like, I paid for it. Like we have a Superfly boat at the crib, of course, and because my dad fishes or whatever. And another dude in the neighborhood is like, oh, you have a boat? Like, why or how? And it's like playing in classical symphony, playing in orchestra growing up. I was usually the only one. I remember one time when I was my senior year in high school, I was placed principal bass of my bass section, and there was a girl named Bailey. She was white from Wisconsin, sitting next to me. And when I got placed first chair, her mother removed her from the youth symphony orchestra. But then I've also been super racist myself, to a lot of different people. One thing that Shay and I always talk about, you're going to hear from later on, about being black in America, how sometimes while I am in that I was in that socioeconomic bracket, I also got racism from my own kind. Like, yo, why do you dress that way? Why do you talk that way? You're not black enough. Oh, why do you wear Abercrombie and Fitch? Oh, you golf? That's a white man's sport. Oh, you play baseball? Oh, that's a white man's sport. But then it's like I go into the world and it's like, oh, you look like that? You can't really be here. And then you can, like, we're going to keep you at arm's length and, like, let you know that you're actually not one of us still. So some people, I don't really know if we said you haven't had experiences. I'm pretty sure there have been people of other ethnicities or races, what have you, that may have experienced similar things where they may have felt racism from their own kind. Oh, that's not Asian enough, or that's not Latino enough, or that's not black enough, So it comes from all angles,
Thank you guys for sharing. Now I got my own mic. Thank you guys for sharing. Last question. Just as we think about now bringing it to the recent events in our country that have really kind of restarted this conversation among some ethnicities and just put a focus on it for others that always knew that was there. And me speaking from that with personal experience. But when you think about what went down in Ferguson, regardless even of your own opinion on what the verdict was, taking all of the legal things aside and just the event that happened itself, or you think about Eric Garner in Staten Island, and just some of the things that have happened within this past year. And this, just in a couple of words, as you think about that, emotionally, what was your original reaction as you saw that? As you saw that in the media? But then in just one or two words, what would you say now us having some time to process that, to kind of get past the wave of the 24-hour news channel that's just showing the riot just happening and happening and happening, us to be able to have some conversations, what would you say are some of the central issues that are promoting and sustaining these ethnic tensions within our country?
She can tell you, I've gotten flack from some of my black friends as well, but my initial reaction was I'm not surprised. Simply because I have been saved, and my perspective is we live in a broken world, so anything is possible at any time, and it can happen to anyone, period. And if we do not focus on that, then we're going to be like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. Well, we live in a broken world, you know? And second question, central issue. I think there's an inauthentic approach to racial reconciliation. It's talked about, it's addressed, but the uncomfort of being willing to educate yourself by talking to someone and express what you don't know and not make jokes about it. Oh, you're just like my black friend. I mean, let's just be friends, you know, like just get there, you know, just clear your mind out a little bit, you know. But that takes situations like this in order to be able to happen, you know.
I think for me it was at the initial outset it was confusion. It was one of the more confusing news events just of all time. I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't understand why it spiraled out into as big of a deal as it did initially because of the same thing. I was not surprised. Like it, you know. I was even thinking to myself, I was like, doesn't this kind of stuff happen like all the time anyway, you know? Like, why was this the catalyzing event? And I think that sort of leads me into the second question, what the central issues are. And I think it's obviously lostness in the world. Like, that's at the heart of this. Sin is at the heart of this on whichever side of the issue or whatever, wherever you're coming from. Sin is at the heart of it. I think there's racism that still exists, and I think that pretending that it doesn't exist is harming us worse than admitting it. I think there is not a willingness to talk, not a willingness to meet each other halfway, not a willingness to understand each other. And then I think there's anger. There's sort of frustration that doesn't know how sometimes to be let out, that doesn't know how to be just sort of satisfied. And then finally, just as I'm thinking about it, I think that our culture, as we move forward, we are going to have to find new ways to talk about it and new ways to sort of to understand one another. But I think even more than that, I think as Christians, we need to be able to stand up for the oppressed and the victim, and stand up for justice and doing what's right at the same time. And I think that in this debate, it's forced people to more or less pick one side. You know what I'm saying? Like you either get to the side of the victim. The strangest thing about the rallies to me, the initial ones especially, were the fact that we had no idea what was going on. Like, I don't know, I was just like I said, confusion, you know, just media everywhere and everything. And people were just so certain that they knew everything about the entire situation and that this guy was just a victim and that he, you know, was completely done wrong. And I think that's a part of our American culture, and it speaks to the way that we deal with sin, too, because it's much easier just to gravitate towards the victim and not have to deal with the aspect of justice at all, right? And then the other side are people that just dismiss everything that's happening as just those people that are, you know, getting angry about whatever, or the type of people that they've loved to point out, well, he was robbing something, so it was right, you know, he was just doing his job, whatever. So I think that we as Christians have to find a new way to, part of the forgiveness process as laid out in the Bible is recognizing sin, calling it sin, saying that something is wrong, and then moving on to a place of forgiveness. And then supporting the victim, supporting the oppressed. It's not a choose one or the other. We have to be able to do both. So,
I have to agree with Josh that at first I was just confused. It's just a lot of things were being said, And the main thing that kept popping up was somebody was just shot down and, like, was shot at and killed. And there was not much detail as to was it justified? Was it actually an action that warranted that act, was it justified to happen? But the reality is that somebody died. And the reaction that the people had, I just thought that it was made a circus out of it, It just spiraled down to something like just a show to me. I was sad that it came down to that because a lot of violence was mixed into it too. Like I didn't understand why people were attacking businesses and why people were attacking each other instead of just stating this is wrong, this is shouldn't have happened. But I just think that the reason that we have racism in our country is because lack of knowledge. Like, we don't know each other, we fear each other, and we have rejection of certain people, like we don't take our time to get to know people. And I just think that when people feel threatened by somebody that they don't know, then you get this kind of actions in turn. So I think instead of just reacting in the moment, we should take our time to actually think about how, like actually examine ourselves and taking the time to see where we're coming from. Is it something that we are actually justified in our feelings, or is it because we just have, I don't know, like, is it just something that we're predisposed to, or because it's within us? Is something because we're human and we have sin in ourselves, so we have these feelings against other people.
As probably if I could say something very quick, something that I thought about. When y'all said about we didn't understand why people reacted so quickly, but I think it's because we are in a reactionary culture, and on top of that, our reaction is also showing to us that it's our right. People are like, oh, you have the right to react that way. You have the right to feel this way because that's what you need to stand up for, and that goes deeper into the notion of what is our identity in. And people are destroying businesses because they look at the past, like the riots in Watts and, in Los Angeles, or the riots in Detroit, back in the day. People say we need to do the same thing, but the difference between then and now is the people that were rioting and in those situations, the racial tensions were much higher in this country, and they were also a lot more educated on what was going on, and they weren't less reactionary and less emotion driven. And because of that, it's a fault thing of where is our identity? I am a black person, and that's because that's what people did in the past. We must have to do the exact same thing right now, and that's the only way to do it. Well, there's ways, Well,
and thank you guys all for just sharing from your experience and just participating in this time of just a conversation.